We're going to be looking at white-collar crime in South Africa this evening. PricewaterhouseCoopers conducts its Global Economic Crime Survey every 2 years, and it's just come out. So we're joined this evening by Peter Goss, Head of Anti-Corruption Solutions at PwC, and also Alicia Goosen, who's General Manager of Specialist Teams at AON South Africa, to look specifically at the insurance angle of these crimes. Good evening, lady and gentlemen, nice to have you with us. I suppose that we should start off, Peter, by just asking, why do PwC do this every 2 years?
Certainly, one of the biggest shortcomings around the management of white-collar crime globally is lack of reliable data around economic crime, white-collar crime, whatever term you want to use to describe these. We therefore conduct a survey every 2 years to get a bit of a snapshot of how white-collar crime is, quote-unquote, performing across various industries.
There's a global one done, but there is also a South African specific report released, which is the one that we're discussing this evening in part. I suppose we should start off by saying that in the key findings, the first key finding is that PwC say they've noticed a steady decrease in the percentage of respondents that indicate they've experienced economic crime in South Africa since 2005. That must be great news.
Nothing to be too comfortable about.
Oh, okay. Right. I was getting all excited here.
You've got a similar trend globally as well. The trend is a downward trend over the last 5 years in the performance of economic crime. And it's simply we survey a number of entities across the world in various industries, and in South African context likewise across various industries. And the trend indicates that we've moved down from somewhat in the 80s percentages, and we're now sitting at 60% of companies responding, yes, we have experienced economic crime over the last 2 years. Globally, the trend is like 10% down over the last 5 years as well.
Do these trends sort of Are you finding a link here in the insurance industry?
I would say certainly agree with the downward cycle, but I think what we're experiencing is that the claims that we're seeing are becoming less in frequency, so less in number, but higher in severity. So we see quite a couple of large claims coming through in respect of the big corporates. So the number is reducing, but the quantum is actually increasing.
But claims in respect of what?
Employee fraud, it's mainly boiling down to employee fraud, either working alone to defraud a company and benefit, or working with syndicated crimes, third parties outside of a company, and actually defrauding the company. So there's a direct financial loss that the company would suffer.
Well, that does lead me, thank you very much for giving me a perfect lead into the next thing I wanted to bring up. The thing that alarmed me was the perpetrator profile that came out in this PwC report, which is shifting towards senior management.
It rhymes perfectly with what has just been said about the quantum involved in frauds. So you have frauds of a higher value but lesser frequency. The higher value I would attribute to exactly what the survey is telling you. Senior managers are more involved in fraud than ever before. 2 years ago we did this survey, and 17% of senior managers were involved in frauds according to those surveyed. Well, it's doubled to 36%. So a third of all frauds are now committed by senior managers. Invariably, when senior management is involved, the value is higher. They have access to a higher value transactions, and therefore, I certainly agree with the tendency in the insurance industry.
But now, this presents a bit of a problem, a huge problem, because if you look at the role these days of non-executive board directors, who are supposed to be overseeing these sort of problems within a company, and what can happen to a non-executive board director if they don't fulfill their duties, you're going to start getting to a situation where, because of the state and flux of what's happening in management and senior management, people are going to say, no, non-executive board director, no thank you.
We're actually experiencing that because we're finding more and more that people are refusing, number one, to sit on boards, being non-executive directors, unless they know that they've got directors and officers liability insurance in place. So that we've seen definitely a big increase in directors and officers liability, and there's a bigger focus on it because of that fact. It's becoming so onerous on directors to sit on boards as non-executives. And I think that's really, leading on to this, especially if you look at what they're responsible for, it's just creating a big exposure to them.
Are we not getting into a possible cycle, a new problem within company systems where it's starting to collapse from the top down?
I'm not so sure about necessarily being a doom and gloom outcome that one should be foreseeing.
Well, listen, I got excited about the fact that the figures were down, and you said, no, well, that's not really to be get excited about. So you were the one who came with the doom and gloom here.
Let me answer the question of non-executive director. Director's liability comes from the responsibilities now set out in the new Companies Act, amongst other responsibilities, best practice, ideals coming from King report on corporate governance. The third one has been released. One must be careful not to combine the two concepts. I think the comforting part for directors who want to sit on boards, coming from the survey, is that fraud risk management controls are the most successful now in identifying white-collar crime. Historically, it used to be whistleblowing. 2 years ago, you would have found that whistleblowing and tip-offs were top of the pops in terms of how white-collar crime was identified. The fact that fraud risk management controls seem to be more of the source of identification and control gives potential directors some comfort that companies are moving in the right direction in terms of controlling the way one should control white-collar crime, which is through comprehensive fraud risk management strategies. So, yeah, doom and gloom in terms of, one has to make the call as to whether or not one wants to serve on a board and the personal liability that comes with that should something go wrong. But in the other side is when you do serve, you should make sure that fraud risk management controls are entrenched and that senior management does take accountability for it and drives those controls.
I'm just looking, and maybe we can get the chart up on the screen as well at the difference between the corporate controls, which are, as you say, internal audits, fraud risk management, suspicious transaction reporting, and so on, against the tip-offs internally, externally, and the whistleblowing system. And they are a lot higher from a corporate point of view. So there's obviously a lot more work being done there. But also, there are a lot of things that are beyond the control of management that are very, very high. And one of the highest things here, in fact, the second highest thing on this particular detection method chart, is by accident. Now, I know you don't like the word accident being in insurance, but yeah. By accident, people are finding out that there's actually fraud being committed in the companies.
Well, I think what inevitably happens is a lot of companies in their risk management policies have now changed. I would say, for example, people have to take 2 weeks uninterrupted leave in a year. And I think that by accident part would come where people are actually on leave, or they've been forced to take some leave, and they then can't cover up what they used to cover up if they're around. So definitely, I think that's where companies are becoming a lot more. They're looking at the HR policies a lot better, and they're actually forcing people, especially in the large financial institutions, your banks. They would force people to take 2 weeks uninterrupted leave for that purpose exactly.
I just want to set the report aside now and all of the sort of technical things about it. Is it just greed, or is it because of people finding themselves spending far too much money that they're starting to enter into these sort of transactions? Because this can cost you your job. This can cost you your livelihood, because if you're fired for something like this, nobody's going to touch you with a barge pole, surely.
Well, Jeremy, sadly, people do touch you with their hands rather than a barge pole, even after fraud. Why? Many companies tend to go the route of resolving fraud amicably, particularly when senior managers are involved. They don't want the embarrassment of being in the media spotlight or in other spotlights, shareholder spotlights, for fraud being found having been perpetrated by senior managers. So yeah, that is quite troubling, but in response to your specific point around being touched, anybody touching you with a barge pole after you leave, or after you've been found to be involved in fraud. I find lots of people, because of this amicable resolution to fraud, and allowing you to resign, for example, having a settlement arrangement with you, it gives you the opportunity to walk into another company simply. And invariably, you may not declare, because labor law says your previous employer can't say we had an amicable arrangement based on the fact that you were asked to leave because of fraud. So you have a major risk in that area of people resolving fraud amicably, and I use that word sarcastically almost.
Yeah. It does present a problem, though, if I'm hiring a senior manager who is seemingly amicably left another post as a prospective employer of that person.
Yeah, and I think it happens in practice all the time. People, like you say, they're being given the opportunity to resign rather than being dismissed, and they would move on. And I think 9 out of 10 times the claims that we've seen, that employee would get involved in fraudulent activities again at the next company that employ them.
But then surely you, from an insurance point of view, should be monitoring where those individuals are going, so that you know where you're going to be exposed to that possible fraud risk.
Fraud. Yes.
Do you do that?
No, I think we obviously the new employer must do the screening to such an extent. But if they would obviously make some phone calls and get reference checks and things like that, and hopefully through that process it will come out. But they could find themselves in a bit of a problem if they complete on there, because annually companies have to complete proposal forms to enable the insurance companies to rate their risk. That employee technically, in terms of that policy wording, if he was found guilty of a previous fraud, is actually not covered in terms of their policy going forward.
So you could be putting yourself and your insurance of your company at risk.
Absolutely, if you don't declare it, and that individual would be totally excluded from the cover going forward.